I don't know about you, but when I look at the world at the moment, when I look at the news, when I look at the stories, I feel a sense of an existential angst, a sense of why can't we do things differently? We're seeing wars in the Middle East that are killing thousands of innocent men, women and children. We're seeing a war in Eastern Europe that's tearing apart two countries, and every month up to 30,000 soldiers on both sides are dying in this war, as well as civilian casualties and civilian deaths as well. And then we're looking at the third world, and we're looking at areas where people don't have access to clean water, that they don't have access to decent food and any kind of medical care. And then we look at the lives of ordinary people in the Western world, where a lot of people are doing 2 or 3 jobs to be able to just break even, to pay the rent and the bills. And people are kind of feeling this sense of there's not very much to look forward to really, because the economic situation doesn't look good, and jobs are insecure, and life feels insecure. And then when we move into the big things, ecological disaster, the dangers of AI losing, falling into the hands of people that would misuse it and it going out of control and causing harm to humanity, the danger of nuclear war and ecological disaster. And when we think of these things, it makes us feel anxious and nervous and insecure. And so a lot of the time we just kind of cut it out, we disassociate from it, and we pretend it's not happening. And that's understandable. We have to find a way to cope. But these disasters, these problems, these difficulties are not going unnoticed. And they're being noticed by intelligences beyond the dimensions of this world. And these intelligences are communicating into our world that they're witnessing and they're noticing, and they're wanting to help us. They're wanting to prevent us from doing great damage to ourselves and to the world. And they're speaking to us, especially at the moment, through children. I'm going to take us back to 1981, between 1981 and 1988, and then to 1994, to 2 different phenomena where non-human intelligence has spoken to children in schools, believe it or not. Children have encountered these intelligences within a school setting, and in which vital and important messages have been given to humanity about our future and destiny. So, the first I'm going to speak about is the 1994 account, and that is the Ariel School phenomenon. So the Ariel School phenomenon speaks about a school in Zimbabwe where on the 16th of September 1994, 60 school children witnessed what looked like a UFO landing. I know it sounds ridiculous when you hear it, but landing just outside of the area of the school. And from this craft, these beings emerged. And these beings looked like the traditional alien greys. Now, a lot of the children were really freaked out by this, and they ran away and went back into the school to tell the school teachers about what was happening. But some of these children were in close proximity and stayed in close proximity to these beings. And what some of these children, and there are 6 in particular that spoke about, once they looked into the eyes of these beings, they were suddenly transfixed, almost taken out of normal reality. And they had placed in their minds visions about the future and the dangers that we face in the future. So I'm going to tell you the names of some of these children, because I think it's always nice to have names. So there was Isabel, who was age 10, and she spoke about these beings speaking through her conscience, that's what she said, and showing her about the future of the world and that humans were harming the earth. And then there was Elsa. She was a young child. She said that frightening thoughts about the Earth's future came into her mind, and showed her, particularly through the eyes of these beings, disaster that was going to come to the earth. And then there was Emily, again a primary school aged child, who spoke about these events both as a child and then as an adult. And as an adult, she continued to verify the truth of what she saw. And then there was Salma, again another child, who continued to verify the validity of what she saw and the experiences she had of the future and the dangers of disaster, ecological and nuclear disaster that she saw. And there was Liesel, and she was a child witness, and she also has spoken about these things as an adult as well and verified the truth of what she saw. And then there was Emma, who gave the same testimony as the other children. All of these children and some other children gave testimony to seeing into the future through the eyes of these beings, a future that was a desolate and not a good one. Now, one of the things that the children talked about was the danger of technology, that they, and one of the children said we were becoming too technologized. And I think that, you know, thinking especially about today with the advent of AI and the idea of, you know, of unregulated AI, which Silicon Valley would really like to see happen, that I think that what that child said was speaking into that problem and into the problems of nuclear war and nuclear weapons and ecocide as well. And I think the other children and what they saw was speaking into some of the disasters and the things that we're seeing now that are dangerous and pose a real risk to humanity. All of these children were interviewed by the eminent Professor John Mack. John Mack was a psychiatrist from the Harvard School of Psychiatry. He was the head of department, and before he'd gone to Zimbabwe to see these children, he had done a lot of research with over 100 UFO abductees, and he transitioned from being a complete disbeliever in anything supernatural or anything that was outside of the ordinary scope of modern medical science to becoming a real believer. He believed in the afterlife, he believed in the non-locality of consciousness, and he believed the accounts of these children in Zimbabwe. And when he spoke to them, I remember seeing the videos of him speaking to them, he was really able to use his skill and his knowledge as a therapist and as a psychiatrist to help them to tell their story, not leading them, not prompting them, but asking them open questions that allowed them to be able to describe what they'd encountered. The phenomenology of the encounter was quite traumatizing for these children, I think. They kind of saw a future that didn't look good, in which technology and weapons and ecological disaster, our harming of the earth, were made real and manifest to them. When we hear these accounts spoken to us today in the 21st century by young children, and then hearing them again as adults, verifying the same details, it should make us sit up and listen. It should make us ask, what responsibility are we taking for trying to encourage our elected leaders, by trying to encourage a spirit of cooperation and an engagement with these problems of technology, these problems of ecological danger? How are watching these accounts prompting us to take action and to think about what we need to do to change the trajectory of the future? And I think that the reason why these non-human intelligences showed these children these things was so that it could speak to us now today, that we could hear those things and think today, what does the future hold for us? Now, what I want to do now is move to the other encounter I spoke about in Kibeho in Rwanda in Central Africa. And this happened between 1981 and 1988. And this wasn't a UFO incursion, but it was a very similar incursion. this was a child on the 28th of November 1981 claiming that she had a vision of a celestial lady, a beautiful lady who called herself the Mother of the Word. This lady was identified as being the Virgin Mary in traditional Catholic symbology. The school where the apparition happened was a Catholic secondary school, and 3 other children from that school also had visions of this lady who were also Roman Catholic. But then there were other children. There was another child in the school who was Muslim, and she had a vision of this lady too. And then there was a Protestant child, and she saw the lady too. And then there was an account of a pagan boy, and he had a vision too of the celestial Christ. And again, the message here was very much the same. Before I go on to do that, I'm going to give the names of these children because I think it's important to give names to witnesses. Alphonsine, she was 16 and she was the first of the Visionaries to have the encounter on the 28th of November. And then there was Nathalie, who was aged 17. Marie Claire, who was about 20. There was Stephanie, who was 14. There was Agnes, who was 21. There was Vestine Selina, and this was a Muslim girl who was probably around 16 years of age. And then there was Emmanuel, who was 15. He was a pagan boy. His visions didn't happen in the school. His happened within his tribal area. But he spoke about having this encounter with Christ, who engaged him in prayer and the development of the spiritual life. The one thing that was different about the encounters in the encounter in Rwanda was that this was a formally religious encounter with a non-human intelligence, but the message was pretty much the same. The call was to change our hearts. It was a much more metaphysical message. It was to change our hearts, to move away from hatred, prejudice, and racism, and to move away from a narcissistic and an avaricious desire for selfishness, to move into a more spiritual centre, one that's occupied with meditation and prayer and spiritual encounter. Now, the way that the vision described it, of course, to these children was very much in traditional Christian terms. But I think with these things, we have to remember that these encounters will reflect the mindset of those that are encountering the vision and their understanding and their language for describing the spiritual life. But the core message is about a turning of mind, heart and soul away from hatred, away from selfishness, away from narcissism, away from hedonism, away from those things that take us away from genuine, compassionate human encounter. Now, one of the things that these children saw, and it was a very frightening vision which took place in August 1992, was a vision of the coming genocide that happened in Rwanda. The children were shown visions of rivers of blood flowing through the streets, people dead, corpses and people dead lying on the streets, and the lady saying, this is going to come about because of a lack of love and an embracement of hatred and vengeance and prejudice and racism. She foretold this happening, and the children were traumatized by seeing this. It was a terrifying experience for them. Some of the children also saw other futuristic visions. There was a report that some of the children saw what looked like fire falling from the sky, which might have been an indicator of nuclear war or something happening ecologically that was, that was threatening humanity. When you think about both encounters, one was a traditionally religious spiritual encounter. The other one was a transpersonal encounter with a UFO, in which the children were shown visions of the future and a vision of the future that was not wanted, that should be avoided. I think that occurred on both sides. The thing about the children as well was when they engaged in these encounters, the children in Rwanda, they were completely absorbed by the vision when they saw it. They couldn't see anything around them. They saw a beautiful garden and a beautiful lady, and they spoke to this lady. And in this visionary experience, they were impervious to pain or to any kind of external stimuli. So scientific and medical tests were done on the children. In one of the encounters, which is on video, you can see on a YouTube video about Rwanda, one of the visionaries, and I think it was Alphonsine, was looking directly into the noonday sun as she was talking to the apparition. Now, you and I know that if you look directly into the noonday sun, particularly in a country like Africa, you're going to burn the retinas out of your eyes. Her eyes were unharmed, and she stared for at least 20 minutes to half an hour at the vision. Tests were undertaken on the children as well, so they were pricked with needles. They had bright lights shone in their eyes. And I saw on one of the tests that were done, a pencil was kind of pushed into the corner of the eye of one of the children where they were looking at the vision. They continued to gaze in a blissful, loving, smiling encounter with this beautiful lady, and these things didn't disturb their encounter. These children were disconnected from the outside world and were seeing something that was beyond this world, another realm, another dimension of reality. The children in Zimbabwe, when they were looking into the eyes of these alien beings, they felt disconnected from the exterior world too. They were absorbed into the experience of seeing the images of the future. And as well as that, some of the children spoke about not being able to see anything around them at the time when it was going on. Very similar to what happened to the children in Rwanda. Now, we're drawing parallels here. There's something that's coming into this world that's speaking to these children and warning them about the future, but using very different masks. The lady is a vision that is consistent with a Catholic vision, but the encounter with this vision brought about a profound sense of love and goodness and warmth in these children. This was an encounter with love. The encounter with the beings in Zimbabwe was an encounter with existential threat, similar to some of the experiences the children in Rwanda had as well, seeing the forthcoming genocide and the visions of things happening in the sky. These children were absorbed in a vision of existential threat, and the beings were saying to them, human beings need to change. They need to turn away from their overemphasis on technology. They need to take better care of the environment. They need to stop proliferating nuclear weapons. The message is very clear on both sides. Whether we're talking about hatred and destruction and warfare, which happened in Rwanda, or the dangers of science and of scientific destruction and danger caused by technology, they're both speaking into a very similar thing. The future needs our cooperation and our effort to make it a more safer and a more stable future. What we have here are encounters that really are encounters for us too. We are being called, in a sense, to be visionaries, to be mystics. Rwanda particularly calls us to a deeper spiritual life, or to a deeper life of meaning, to be able to look with eyes of love and compassion, forgiveness and warmth, eradicating hatred and overcoming division. And the experience of the children in Zimbabwe is calling us to take responsibility for the technologies that we're seeing now become more current in the world. and particularly our neglect of the ecosphere. Imagine looking into a future where the land is desolate. The children in Rwanda, in Zimbabwe, saw desolate, dry desert lands completely destroyed. This is us as well. We are being called to be visionaries into that unpleasant future, and to take responsibility in some way, in somehow, to become collaborators with the higher dimensions, but also with human life and structure in this world as well, to do something to change the future. I'm really trying my best to be ecologically competent, to try not to consume fossil fuels when possible. I have a car, unfortunately, and I have to use it for my work in palliative care, but I try to restrict the use of that as much as I can until I'm able to afford to buy an electric car. That's what I'm going to try and do. I'm also joining with Pope Leo and his encyclical on the dangers of artificial intelligence, and I'm going to be campaigning with our government in the United Kingdom to be really cautious about building these AI centres and putting AI into a position of unbounded and boundless and unregulated power, that it could somehow infiltrate into our world and potentially cause harm to human society. I'm going to be responsible for that. I'm also going to be trying to deepen my own spiritual life, meditate and pray for humanity and for an increase of consciousness and conscious awareness in the world. And in my work as a psychotherapist in palliative care, I've worked as a chaplain and I work as a psychotherapist in palliative care. I try to bring the spirit of compassion and warmth and care to people at the end of life. And then I try to take that compassion, warmth and care into the outside world and try to share compassion with people that I meet and people I encounter. Compassion is a desire and a warmth in your heart to recognize suffering in yourself and in others, and to try to do something to alleviate that suffering. And that might be just listening to someone who's suffering, who's struggling, who needs an open ear and a kind ear. It might be writing media or creating social media that inspires people to move into a more compassionate and warmer state of being, and to encourage others to do the same. We don't have to be, we don't have to be Mother Teresa's or Martin Luther King's. For most of us, that's not possible. But we can try to be kinder. We can try to tell our elected officials that we're not happy with what's happening with artificial intelligence, with global warming, and our efforts to try to stem ecological disaster. And we can do it in the way that we treat each other as well. Each one of us can become conscious agents in our own communities, in our own lives, in the people around us, to try to bring this spirit that we've seen communicated to us through the visionaries in Rwanda and through the children in Southern Africa that that had this experience with unidentified aerial phenomena in Zimbabwe. We can take those messages to heart, and we can do our best to try to make this world a better place. It's one thing to be talking endlessly about unidentified aerial phenomenon, UFOs, disclosure. What is the government going to tell us? It doesn't really matter. We know what these intelligences are communicating to us. We've got eyes to see and ears to hear. We don't need some government disclosure to tell us that there are intelligences beyond our dimension of reality, in other dimensions, in other parallel universes, whatever, I don't know what you might call it, that are speaking to us in this world and trying to call us into a higher level of consciousness and a higher level of spirit and a higher level of living. We don't need to keep You know, I mean, when I watch some of these UFO videos and we're all gripping onto the edge of our seats, waiting for what the government's going to tell us next, whatever government, particularly I think it might be the American government. Stop it now. You don't need it. What you do need is to take seriously what we do know about this phenomenon and what it's trying to say to us. Thank you, and I'm wishing you all very great blessings.